All right, hi guys. So I was planning to address this when I got back, but I wanted to talk about your questions now while they might still be fresh in your mind. So I was reading through your discussion circle reflections and questions, and I'm just gonna go through this and give it to you through this way. So I categorize these into three different groups. I'll try to talk through them fairly quickly. But I do want to address what you guys asked. So I'll start off with just questions about the Vuong and Ballinger pieces. So you guys noticed the Vuong one was denser. And hopefully one of the questions was what was the actual significance of the YouTube video we watched. I wanted you guys to see that just to get a sense for who he was and his idea of narrative, which he said was fractured because of the world we live in and the world you guys are growing up in. He's pretty young, so he's relevant that way. And he was a poet. Like I said, I wanted you guys to get that idea of, what was it? Seeing things through a beginner's eyes. So he talked about how his practice of Buddhism helped him, and I thought it was a really useful technique for describing, since we're doing narrative and working on that more creative writing. So that inspired the prompt that you guys wrote about when you watched that video. How old was Vuong when he wrote the essay we read? That's an excellent question. He would have been an established writer, but right now he's 31. So he would have been pretty young. He only got a bachelor's degree, but he's like a very recognized poet and writer, which is pretty rare to not sort of go through those traditional academic avenues of getting an MFA or a PhD. So he's really cool in that sense too. A question I got a lot was about that last sentence in his piece. He writes, "I was a fraud in a field of language, which is to say I was a writer. I have plagiarized my life to give you the best of me." And a lot of you said, like, what does he mean by I was a fraud in a field of language, which is to say I was a writer? And I think throughout the Vuong piece, I read it 3 times, and every time I read it, like, different pieces kept popping out to me. And I think that's really the beauty of it, which frustrated you guys, that it was more vague. And I would encourage you to change the way that you read things. Not every article is written for the benefit of the reader's clarity, and you can see how his profession as a poet is making its way into that narrative in more creative ways, more abstract ways that you guys have to do the work to interpret intentionally. Not that he's just sort of, I would argue against him being vague and say it's more abstract and open to interpretation purposefully. So I'm just going to tell you the way I sort of interpret that, and I think there's a lot of ways, but to say a fraud in a field of language, which is to say I was a writer, he seems to be poking fun in a way at what writers do, that in a way we're continuously building on the ideas of others, and there's a long tradition of that in the study of literature. So to be a fraud in a field of language is to do as he does, which is take ideas and make them his own. And he sort of, you can see how these are related through Vuong being a student that's sort of the victim of this teaching style, and Ballinger preaching against this certain teaching style that, like, you must do it this way. But in a way, these essays also contrast, because Vuong's not writing to get his ideas out, right? He's writing because he sees the beauty in the language, and he's piecing this language together in ways that he might not be doing purposefully, but in ways that, once they come together, create something else. So maybe the ideas come after he begins the writing, which the longer I write, the more, and the more I read, the more I think that there isn't always a distinction between, as Ballinger says, what you say and how you say it, because how you say it and the language that you use it conveys a lot of meaning. But I do certainly agree with Ballinger that we should value ideas first as you guys are sort of learning to write academically, and also recognize that academic writing is one sort of language, and there's different ways to communicate. And I love that line, I have plagiarized my life to give you the best of me. This idea that he's picking out things as he's writing and leaving a lot out, which we do in narrative, right? A lot of what makes it onto the paper isn't everything that's going into our heads. It's a version that we've taken and chosen to share. Okay, that was kind of long. Curriculum choices. I saw a lot of frustration at the way that you guys do learn English and the way that you're taught English. And we've talked about some of this before when we talked about, what was it called? The first article that you guys did your close read on about hidden intellectualism. So why do we read the literature that we do? Who picks the articles that we read? Why do we not read text that we can connect to more? I think, so I'm torn on this because I understand your guys' frustrations, and a lot of times I'm frustrated that my options to teach are limited. And I also think sometimes that students can be kind of whiny, which is not a bad thing. But there's a balance that I walk between having to teach certain things that I don't like, and that freedom that when I can give you that freedom. And a lot of, it went black. A lot of why you read what you read comes down to what we actually have to offer. So I pick all the articles, and I get to do that because they're easy to access. I don't pick the novels. Some I genuinely like teaching, some I like less than others. But it depends on also what's in the book room, which at the Career Center we are pretty limited. So someone asked why I taught the Roundhouse because of the Lakota Way too. First of all, because I think the Lakota Way is kind of simplistic and boring, and you guys are able to talk more about the Roundhouse, which is more complex and nuanced of a story and a more difficult text. So that's why I chose it for you guys. Who picks so literature? Yeah, it comes down to curriculum, but smaller pieces, I have a lot more freedom in that. Why do we not read text that we can connect to more? That's the part where I think I try to do my best, but I think it's also on you guys to make that connection on your own in ways. You're not going to like everything you read, which is fine. But you're also not you're not being babysat. It's not always a teacher's job to make sure you're having fun and engaged. You guys can find a way into it. Or if you hate a book, you can use it as an example to be like, I hated this, but hey, reading this taught me that this is what I like in literature. So I'm a big proponent of you don't have to like everything, but you can't say a book is bad because your teachers lack more experience and ability to discern what's literary or not, and we can talk about that. And they ultimately have the rationale to teach what they teach unless we're forced to, right? Why is the grading system of English so strict? I want to know more about what you guys mean by that question. Why don't students have the right to explore literature and find their voice rather than copy the voices of people before in a less effective way? I want to know what you mean also by rather than copy the voices of people before in a less effective way. Creative writing especially has always been taught in terms of modeling. You can't be a good writer if you're not a reader. So I think thoughtful teachers will try to pick things out and know why they're picking a certain text, why they're having you look at setting in this, maybe dialogue in this, maybe how this essay is particularly useful at laying things out in the case of Ballinger, whereas this one is more implicit in thesis, which we're also going to talk about. Thesis, you guys had a lot of questions on that for chapter 6. Why don't we practice the form of education presented in the first story? I think it depends on the teacher. And I know time-wise, it's a lot harder to focus on ideas because it takes a lot more time. I'm grading your guys' roundhouse essays now, and there's a little section where I focus on language because ultimately, when we're talking about academic writing, that presentation does matter. But your ideas matter more. So I personally focus on that idea, those ideas and that argument and how well you're analyzing them. And it's, in English, it's a very holistic subject, right? Because you learn about like thesis and analysis, but there can be things that you're doing really well and things that you have weaknesses on. So a lot of times it is sort of compartmentalized, which is what you might be referring to as strict. I like those questions though. Ask me more of them, clarify them in the comments on this video so I can address them further. And this, obviously you guys, this is a conversation that we'll continue to have in college writing. You guys are asking great questions. How I feel about students writing badly in my class. So I try not to like write every little error on your guys' essays or correct them because I don't want to be like the red pen lady like Ballinger talks about. And I have you guys do free writes because I think it is important for you to turn off that editor section of your brain and focus on the language. So I like to think I'm teaching it with a focus on ideas. But as you may notice, Ballinger doesn't give a lot of practical advice. It's more theoretical. We need to focus on this before we focus on this. But in reality, English teachers also have all of these curriculum goals to hit that we have to teach you to be doing our jobs. So my balance is to comment more on your ideas, your development in your writing, to give you that space to free write where you practice turning it off, right? Turning off that editor brain, turning off that worried part of your brain, which is uncomfortable for a lot of students. You guys probably notice this about yourselves. You're not all using that time, right? You're still thinking, and the goal is to write without necessarily thinking exactly how you're saying it. As a teacher, what do you find more important, the grammar or the topic? The topic. And teaching grammar is, people don't even know how to teach grammar, myself included. There's a lot of research that shows that like rote grammar exercises don't really help you guys learn grammar. What helps you learn grammar is by writing and writing and writing and writing and writing. Okay, that was a long video. Leave more questions below. Please comment and let me know that you watched this because this is information I want you guys to have moving forward, and I wanted to clarify a little bit about the Wong and the Ballinger and compare them. So, all right. See you guys soon, hopefully.